For the last 5 months, the darkness has been the most pervasive aspect of Destiny 2, both in the lore, but even more so in the gameplay. When Beyond Light launched, the franchise's first darkness subclass, Stasis, came with it. And this was an occasion that many had been begging Bungie for since the earliest days of Destiny 1. Playable darkness subclasses. And on the PvE side of the game, I'd say that Stasis has been a massive hit, both in the lethality department as well as in how customizable the subclasses really are. As for PvP, Stasis has served to massively shake up the meta, but doing so with things like being frozen in place or having your aim go to Timbuktu just really isn't it, Chief. However, despite your joy or misgivings over Stasis, you can't deny that it brought true innovations to the franchise, with Stasis being a proper element with unique features like slow, freeze, and shatter, as well as a simple but elegant subclass customization scheme that plays off of the elemental abilities of Stasis. Unfortunately, this innovation to elements and subclasses was reserved only for Stasis, and our old Light Subclasses have been completely left behind, with locked subclass perk clusters that serve as a stark reminder of how far Destiny 2 has come since its disastrous launch almost 4 years ago. It's time for the game's Solar, Arc, and Void subclasses to be brought into the modern day. In this video, I'm going to explain how I would revamp the game's Solar subclasses. We're going to discuss how Solar as an element can be reworked to have unique elemental effects like Stasis, and we will then discuss how Hunter, Warlock, and Titan Solar subclasses can be redesigned with customizable aspects and fragments. Let's jump in. So, let's jump right in and discuss how Solar as an element can be reworked to have unique elemental effects like Stasis. Perhaps the biggest issue with the Light subclasses today is that instead of feeling like different unique elements, our light powers are instead a single, streamlined space magic with orange, blue, and purple color palettes. I mean, is there really any difference between a solar, vortex, or pulse grenade other than what color it is? This example is a microcosm of the major issue with the Light subclasses. They all just blend together, and none of them really have a unique identity or role. Bungie has committed Destiny 2 to embrace more RPG elements, and giving Solar, Arc, and Void individual identities and effects on the battlefield would go a long way towards that goal. So, how can we make Solar into a unique gameplay element? Compared to Arc and Void, at least, Solar is the light element that is closest to having its own identity. In the game today, certain solar abilities will cause targets to burn and suffer damage over time, and there are other solar abilities that cause either explosions or targets to explode themselves. What if we were to give Solar a third unique effect? Perhaps make it a precursor to a full burn. This third unique effect of Solar could be called Ignite, which could stack up to 100, at which point the target would begin burning. Does this sound familiar? This trio of unique effects, Ignite, Burn, and Explode, is a mirror of the unique effects of Stasis, Slow, Freeze, and Shatter. Across the Hunter, Warlock, and Titan Solar subclasses, roughly a third of the current abilities cause a burn effect, and another third of the current abilities cause an explosion of sorts. It would be pretty simple to give the remaining Solar abilities an Ignite effect to round out the subclasses. Now, you may be asking, what would Ignite even do? Would Burn be updated to do more than what it does today? And how would Explosions play into all of this? My goal with Ignite, Burn, and Explode is to give the Solar subclasses a unique identity, potency in PvE on the level of Stasis, meaningful customization choices, and last but not least, to not ruin the game in PvP like Stasis did at Beyond Light's launch. Before we talk about the specifics of Ignite, Burn, and Explode, there is one other functionality that I want to incorporate not just to the solar element, but to all elements in the game. In my video last week about revamping champions, I went on a bit of a tangent about how Stasis and the two upcoming Darkness subclasses in Witch Queen and Lightfall are likely to be dark mirrors of our current Light subclasses. Basically, Solar and Stasis mirror each other, seeing as one is about heat energy and the other is about the complete lack of heat energy. Arc and a potential Corruption subclass in Witch Queen are likely to be inverses of each other, and I think it's likely that a potential Gravity subclass in Lightfall will emerge as the mirror to Void. The point of all this is that I think it would add both depth and some extra oomph to subclass composition in team-based activities if each pair of light and dark subclass elements primed targets to take more damage from the other. In this system, targets affected by Stasis would take bonus damage to solar abilities, and vice versa, with targets affected by solar abilities taking bonus damage from Stasis abilities. Arc and Corruption would play off of each other in a similar fashion, as would Void and Gravity. And the best part of all is that a system like this already exists in the game today in the form of the artifact mod Focusing Lens, which states your light abilities do bonus damage to combatants affected by Stasis. What I'm proposing is a permanent form of Focusing Lens, but restricted to each pair of light and dark mirrors. I think this would do wonders to making the game into more of an RPG, but in a way that has no ill effects on PvP. Now, let's get back to Solar specifically and discuss the Ignite effect. The Ignite debuff would come in stacks, similar to the stacking system incorporated by Stasis Slow. When a target reaches 100 stacks of Ignite, they would begin to burn. When a target is afflicted by Ignite, they would have their outgoing damage reduced, with the amount of damage reduction dependent on the number of stacks of Ignite. At 100 stacks of Ignite, the target would do 20% less damage, and this would scale down linearly to 0% less damage at 0 stacks of Ignite. Ignite would last for 3 seconds by default, similar to the base duration time of Stasis Slow. My inspiration for the status effects of Ignite come from one of the most popular video game franchises of all time, Pokemon. In Pokemon, when a target is afflicted with the Burn status effect, they have their attack stat reduced and take burn damage at the end of every turn. Ignite is more or less a replication of the damage reduction side of burns in Pokemon. Now, let's talk about the burn effect. The burn debuff wouldn't really change much from how it functions today, with a burning target suffering ticks of damage for a short period of time. In addition to the damage ticks, a burning target would do 20% less damage, a carryover from the max damage reduction of the Ignite debuff. Basically, Burn would be the final form of Ignite, with extra damage taken on top of the decreased damage output. The final effect of Burn is that burning targets would leave behind trails of solar flames on the ground wherever they go, and these flame trails would be like a milder version of Void Wall grenades. This way, all solar subclasses could truly set the world on fire, an ability that is currently reserved for just Sunspot Titans and Sunbracer Warlocks. Don't worry, these solar flame trails wouldn't be as strong as either Sunspots or solar grenade spam, but instead is meant to be a nice add-on to base solar abilities, seeing as solar should be about setting as many things ablaze as possible. And lastly, let's talk about the explode effect. Right now, there are a number of solar abilities that cause an explosive effect, such as Fusion Grenade Detonation or Bottom Tree Dawnblade's Igniting Touch Melee, which causes targets to burn and then explode. I don't think that solar explosions need any base level changes, but I think that solar aspects and fragments could be developed that play off of solar explosions. similar to stasis fragments like Whisper of Shards, which grants benefits for shattering stasis crystals. And with all of these changes to solar as an element, I think it would be on par with stasis, both in terms of unique effects, as well as possessing an individual identity of Burn the World. Now, let's dive into solar hunters and redesign them to have fully customizable subclasses. With solar as an element itself revamped, we can now discuss how Hunter, Warlock, and Titan solar subclasses can be redesigned with customizable aspects and fragments. We're going to start this discussion with solar hunters. In the game today, solar hunters do have some customization options, being able to select either marksman's or gambler's dodge, a choice between high, strafe, or triple jump, and then your pick of incendiary, swarm, or trip mine grenades. The problem then comes with the 3 subclass trees. These trees are clusters of 4 perks that are bound to each other, and you only have the choice of one of the 3 trees. In contrast, Stasis Hunter lets you choose your dodge, jump, and grenade, and then gives you the choice of which aspects to run with 2 aspect slots available. An aspect is something that completely changes how the subclass plays, with powerful abilities like Shatter Dive that gives Stasis Hunters brand new movement tech. Each aspect allows a set number of fragments to be equipped as well, with more potent aspects like Winter Shroud only granting 1 fragment slot, but weaker aspects like Grim Harvest granting 2 fragment slots. And finally, depending on your equipped aspects, you can equip anywhere from 2 fragments up to a theoretical 6 fragments, if you had 2 very weak aspects on. These fragments don't introduce brand new abilities like aspects do, but instead are add-ons that play off of stasis as an element. Things like Whisper of Durance, which extends the duration of the slow debuff, or Whisper of Refraction, that grants class ability energy for defeating slowed or frozen targets. Some of these fragments even change your ability stat point totals, with some fragments granting positive stat changes, like the +10 strength from Whisper of Durance, and others that dish out negative stat changes, like the -10 strength penalty from Whisper of Hedrons. We need to decouple the Light subclass trees and recategorize the perks within them into aspects, fragments, super abilities, and melee abilities. And the crazy thing is, that process is actually pretty simple, as within the vast majority of Light subclass trees, there is typically 1 perk that alters the behavior of the super, 1 perk that alters the behavior of the melee, and then 2 perks that grant new abilities in a similar fashion to the stasis aspects. The only things missing are fragments unique to each light element, be it solar, arc, or void. To remedy this, I've designed 8 new solar fragments that could be used for solar hunters, warlocks, and titans, similar to how stasis fragments are ubiquitous across the 3 stasis subclasses. With all of these details in mind, let's walk through what an updated hunter solar subclass screen would look like. First off, you'd be presented with a choice of 3 different super options: 6-shooter, Blade Barrage, and Line 'em Up, which enables precision damage for Golden Gun. The current stasis subclasses don't have selectable super options, but they're also brand new. Our light subclasses have been around for nearly 7 years and have seen lots of time and design effort poured into them. We had selectable perks that altered the behavior of our supers back in Destiny 1, and I see no reason why that shouldn't also be the case for an updated light subclass system in Destiny 2. There's no need to remove supers arbitrarily that are not IP defining. After selecting your super attunement, you'd then have your choice of dodge as well as your jump. Then you'd have a choice between 3 different melee options. You'd have Weighted Knife, which would be updated to inflict stacks of ignite upon impact with a target, or you could choose Proximity Explosive Knife, which would cause explosive damage, and your last choice would be Knife Trick, which would cause targets to burn. For your grenades, you'd again have 3 different options. You'd have Swarm Grenades, which would be updated to inflict stacks of ignite upon damaging a target, or you could choose Incendiary Grenades, which would cause targets to burn. Perhaps you instead favor the Trip Mine Grenade, which would cause explosive damage. And now, here's where the fun begins. For your aspects, you'd have 2 slots and 6 different options to choose from. You'd have Practice Makes Perfect, which would now reduce the cooldown of any of the 3 super options, and would come with 2 fragment slots. There would also be Knock 'em Down, which would now increase the damage of any of the 3 super options, and would come with just 1 fragment slot, as bonus super damage is a very powerful perk. Another aspect would be Deadshot, which would come with 3 fragment slots, as an aim assist buff for Golden Gun isn't that great of a perk, and only does something for when your super is active. The next aspect option would be Chains of Woe, which would come with 2 fragment slots. You could also choose Playing with Fire, which would be updated to recharge any of the 3 solar melee options faster, not just Knife Trick, and this aspect would come with 2 fragment slots. And finally, the last aspect option would be Burning Edge, which would come with 2 fragment slots. And now, let's discuss the solar fragments. I've designed 8 solar fragments from which you'd be able to choose from. The first of these fragments would be called the Scavenger, where picking up ammo would reduce the cooldown of your grenade and melee abilities, and would grant a bonus plus 10 resilience. This fragment was inspired by the old Scavenger perk found in the Gunslinger subclass back during Destiny 1. The next fragment would be Call of the Kindler, and it would make Ignite from your abilities last longer, increase the duration of abilities that linger, and would incur a penalty of minus 10 discipline. This fragment would be the solar mirror of the Stasis fragment, Whisper of Durance. Next up would be Call of the Insightful, where defeating ignited or burning targets would grant you class ability energy. This fragment would be the solar mirror of the Stasis fragment, Whisper of Refraction. The fourth solar fragment would be Call of the Radiant, where defeating burning targets would grant a small amount of grenade and melee energy to nearby allies, and it would also give a bonus plus 10 recovery. This fragment was inspired by the old perk Song of Flame from the Sunsinger subclass back during Destiny 1. The fifth solar fragment would be Call of the Flame, where combatants would take increased burn damage. Note that for this fragment, combatants means PvE enemies only. No need to worry about overly potent damage over time abilities in the Crucible. The sixth solar fragment would be Call of the Mighty, where defeating a combatant with solar ability damage has a chance to generate an orb of power and would incur a penalty of minus 10 intellect. This fragment was inspired by the old perk Sunburst from the D1 Sunsinger class. The seventh solar fragment would be Call of the Forge, where grenade energy would recharge faster when you're near 2 or more targets, and would incur a penalty of minus 10 strength. This fragment would be the solar mirror of the Stasis fragment Whisper of Fractures, but would grant faster grenade cooldown instead of melee cooldown. And finally, the eighth solar fragment would be Call of the Pyromancer, where explosions from your solar abilities would have a larger blast radius, and targets defeated by solar ability explosions would have a chance to explode themselves. This fragment would be the subclass version of Sunshot, letting your explosive solar abilities have the chance to chain explosions. And with all these new fragments and the freeing of melee, super, and aspect level perks from our current locked subclass trees, there would be a ton of new customization and builds available as a solar hunter. Let me walk you through a potential new build under this system. Say you wanted to go all in on the Call of the Pyromancer fragment and fill the world with solar explosions. You could trick yourself out with trip mine grenades and the proximity explosive knife, and then take advantage of Gambler's Dodge to regain your melee more often. You could take this even further with the Call of the Forge fragment, giving you a reduced trip mine grenade cooldown when you're off dodging your enemies to get your melee back. For your super, you could then choose Blade Barrage, which does explosive damage. To get your Blade Barrage more often, you could equip the Call of the Mighty fragment to generate orbs from your solar ability kills. And you could also rock the aspect Practice Makes Perfect, which would reduce the cooldown of your super on any precision hit. You could even rock the aspect Knock 'em Down to make your Blade Barrage do even more damage. And finally, to truly cap off the build, you could equip the exotic gauntlets Shards of Galanor in order to refund super energy after every Blade Barrage usage. And why stop there? Slap on Sunshot for even more solar explosion fun, and if you've got them, you could outfit your Guardian with Warmind Cell mods like Wrath of Rasputin, which allows all your solar explosion kills the chance to generate Warmind cells, as well as Rage of the Warmind, which adds solar splash damage to the explosion of Warmind cells themselves, which can then chain with Wrath of Rasputin to create even more Warmind cells. And this crazy explosive build is just one example of what would be possible as a solar hunter with updated subclass customization. Now, let's turn our eyes to redesigning solar warlocks with this aspect and fragment system. Now, let's take a look at what an updated Solar Warlock subclass would look like. First off, you'd be presented with a choice of 3 different super options. Winged Sun, which would allow Dawnblade to build up momentum and zoom like how it used to, but at the cost of a shorter super duration. You'd also have Well of Radiance, as well as Fated for the Flame, which would allow your Daybreak projectiles to have better tracking. After selecting your super attunement, you'd then have your choice of Rift, as well as your choice of Jump. Then, you'd have a choice between 3 different melee options. You'd have Celestial Fire, which would be updated to inflict stacks of Ignite upon impact with a target, or you could choose Guiding Flame, which would cause targets to burn and empower yourself and nearby allies. And your last choice would be Igniting Touch, which would cause targets to burn and then explode. For your grenades, you'd again have 3 different options. You'd have Solar Grenades, which would continuously damage and burn enemies, or you could choose Firebolt Grenades, which would be updated to inflict stacks of Ignite upon damaging a target. Perhaps you instead favor the Fusion Grenade, which would cause explosive damage. For your aspects, you'd have 2 slots and 6 different options to choose from. You'd have Heat Rises, which would be a combination of the old Heat Rises and Winged Sun perks from the Top Tree Dawnblade subclass perk cluster, and with such powerful effects jammed into one aspect, it would only come with 1 fragment slot. There would also be Icarus Dash, which would also only come with 1 fragment slot, as Icarus Dash is one of the most potent movement abilities in the game. Another aspect would be Everlasting Fire, which again would only come with just 1 fragment slot, as the ability to prolong your super is very powerful. The next aspect option would be Phoenix Dive, which would come with 3 fragment slots, as the health regen from Phoenix Dive is pretty minimal. You could also choose Divine Protection, which would come with 2 fragment slots. And finally, the last aspect option would be Benevolent Dawn, which again would come with 2 fragment slots. With your aspects selected, you would then be able to choose from the same 8 solar fragments that we discussed earlier in the video. As for a new, unique build that would be possible for Solar Warlocks under this new system, imagine selecting both Icarus Dash and Phoenix Dive to become the ultimate Sky Warrior, with 2 unique movement options for aerial gameplay. Now, let's turn our eyes to redesigning Solar Titans with this aspect and fragment system. Now, let's take a look at what an updated Solar Titan subclass would look like. First off, you'd be presented with a choice of 3 different super options. Vulcan's Rage, which would cause explosive damage. You'd also have Burning Ball, as well as Endless Siege, which would create sunspots that inflict the burn effect. After selecting your super attunement, you'd then have your choice of Barricade, as well as your Jump. Then, you'd have a choice between 3 different melee options. You'd have Hammer Strike, which would cause a burn effect upon impact with a target, or you could choose Throwing Hammer, which would be updated to inflict stacks of Ignite upon impact with a target, and your last choice would be Mortar Blast, which would cause a solar explosion that would set nearby enemies on fire. For your grenades, you'd again have 3 different options. You'd have Thermite Grenades, which would be updated to inflict stacks of Ignite upon impact with a target, or you could choose Incendiary Grenades, which would cause targets to burn, or perhaps you instead favor the Fusion Grenade, which would cause explosive damage. For your aspects, you'd have 2 slots and 6 different options to choose from yet again. You'd have Sun Warrior, which would be updated to increase the duration of any of the 3 super options when you pass through a sunspot, and it would come with 2 fragment slots. There would also be Soul Invictus, which would only come with 1 fragment slot, as health regeneration of any solar ability kill is very powerful, not to mention the sunspot generation. Another aspect would be Explosive Pyre, which would come with 2 fragment slots, because while this is an ability that only affects your super, it makes your super far more powerful, as defeated enemies would be exploding left and right. The next aspect would be Tempered Metal, which would come with 2 fragment slots. You could also choose Roaring Flames, which would come with just 1 fragment slot, as increased solar ability damage is a very strong perk. And finally, the last aspect option would be Tireless Warrior, which would come with 3 fragment slots, as this aspect pigeonholes you into a single melee option to have any benefit. With your aspects selected, you would then be able to choose from the same 8 solar fragments that we discussed earlier in the video. As for a new, unique build that would be possible for Solar Titans under this new system, I think that taking the current bottom tree hammer, subclass tree, and infusing it with hammer strike for debuffs, as well as fragments that cause your thermite grenades and sunspots to last longer, would be extremely potent. You could then select fragments to make PvE combatants take more burn damage from your abilities, and then as a final supplement, the Call of the Radiant fragment would decrease the grenade and melee cooldown of your allies when you defeat burning enemies. The synergies possible with an updated Solar Titan subclass are simply endless. And just like that, we've come to the end of another video. Hopefully you guys all enjoyed this latest installment, how we can continue to evolve Destiny 2. Subclass customization for our older light-based classes has been one of the most requested features from Bungie ever since the reveal of Stasis and its aspect and fragment system. To Bungie's credit, the old subclass perk trees are for the most part very synergistic, and many of those trees are as potent as the best Stasis combinations. However, considering how much that Bungie has marketed Destiny 2 on play your own way, it's time for our light-based classes to be held to that standard. And with all that said, that's going to be it from me this week. Sorry about the later upload than usual on this one. Work the last few weeks has been absolutely kicking my butt, so my apologies. I've already got some ideas in mind for updates to the Arc and Void subclasses, so leave a comment down below if you'd like me to make videos for the other 2 light elements in the coming weeks. As always, if you want to support this channel, make sure to leave a comment down below, drop a like, and hit that sub button. Have a wonderful week, guys, and I hope to catch you all in the next one. This has been your host, Kujay. Cheers.